let's see, and many points of agreement as well as disagreement. But there's one I wanted to kind of relate something that's in Lester Brown's book on Plan B, which deals with this topic in general. And he says that a few weeks after, or a few days actually, after Pearl Harbor, he called the combined capitalists and industrialists of the United States together into his office. And he told them his plan. He says, we're going to need 200,000 tanks, we're going to need 50,000 fighter planes, 50,000 bombers, so many jeeps, and so forth and so on. He gave his full plan there. And they looked at him and said, Mr. President, you don't understand. We can never meet those goals you're setting forth because we have a huge demand for automobiles. We have 3 million automobiles we have to produce. And FDR looked at him and said, no, you don't understand. I'm canceling the production and sale of passenger cars is banned for the duration. So that was it. And the reason he could get away with it was, of course, all the major institutions of American society supported the war and pushed for the war. This was a rational plan. Also, it didn't really cut into the profits of the industrialists because they were making war material now, so they made even more profits there. But the thing is, I think it's a couple points I want to make about this. The first is the idea of banning passenger cars completely, irrespective of whether they run on gas or whatever. My son has 2 Teslas and a bank of solar panels and so forth, but still there's a tremendous ecological cost to making any kind of passenger cars. And so, right now, okay, United States, China probably, EU and so forth are the key things, but suppose everybody in India, everybody in Africa, we have 8 billion people. Suppose there are 8 billion cars driving around, and then it goes up to 10 or 12 billion people. So there's a real question about not just the carbon footprint, but the whole ecology of the situation and the resources of the planet, basically. And the idea of just doing a cost analysis, this is cheap, this is getting cheaper and cheaper. Well, that's not the only question. There's ecologists use the measure of ecological footprint. How much the world's resources are being sucked up by this. And there's measures on this. And even the computer, just a little thing, they've gotten real cheap recently. But there's a huge carbon and ecological footprint for these computers. So I think we really need to analyze each of these things. We need to analyze our lifestyle and understand there may be major shifts required in that. And I think we need an ecological approach that looks at all these things simultaneously.
Sandeep, you want to respond to one question at a time, or shall we?
That's not really a question, but
no, it is a comment, and sure. I think it's a totally valid point, and we need to have a discussion on whether the people of this world can have a lifestyle that the middle classes across the world, China, India, Europe, Japan, US have, without really seriously disrupting global ecological balance. I think it's a very important question as to whether this kind of consumption patterns and lifestyles can be scaled up to the remaining part of the world. Because that's what everybody wants. And whether it's possible or not. My view is that, personal view is that maybe not in its current form. You don't need to have cars for everyone. I agree with you, Gene. Public transportation and large-scale transportation can, you don't need to have personal transportation for everyone. It's not needed. And look at cars. What is the utilization of cars? You buy a car. Out of 8,000 hours in a year, you probably use it for 10 hours, 100, 200 hours. The utilization of a car is very, very low as a resource. We don't need to build technologies with such low utilization, which have such a massive ecological footprint. We need to have technologies where if you build a car or any transportation means of transportation, its utilization is 50 to 70%, not like 2 or 3%, which is what cars have really. I mean, most of our cars sit on our driveways most of the time, they don't get used, and they have a huge ecological footprint. So I think it makes perfect sense to look at technological alternatives where we don't waste resources the way capitalism does. It's a really important point. But I still think, based on whatever I have studied, that yes, it is possible for the remaining 8.5 billion people and another 2 billion people that will come before the population of the earth stabilizes to have a very high lifetime, like middle classes of, the middle classes across the world. I shouldn't just point out at the advanced capitalist world. I think it's possible. I mean, not in its current form, but the material development of rest of the humanity can happen with a judicious choice of technologies without hitting the what's called as the global the boundaries of ecological boundaries of Earth.
Gigi.
I don't buy the CO2 at all. I think what was it you said? The ruling class, something, the CO2. That's
right.
their main thing. They're fooled by. You said something that I said, yeah, that's it. What did you say? Can't remember. Because then you changed it all and said, oh no, it's CO2. It's got to go down. Baloney. CO2 makes everything greener and nicer and fresher, and it makes a whole bunch of oxygen for us to breathe. I don't buy that. And here's the deal. The ruling class does not want us ever to talk about war. You didn't even mention war. The ruling class doesn't want us to talk about war. Now, if they're worried about oil, end the wars. They're not worried about oil. They're not worried about CO. They want us to talk about CO2. That'd be cool. Let's talk about, whenever they go to have the big old talk about climate change, they always, we got to have the carbon tax. That's all they ever come up with. No stop the war. Tulsi can't even talk she can't even talk. They got her so cut off. Anyone that talks against war, or even brings it up because that makes people think about it. Okay, that's one thing. Then the other thing I'd like to say is plastic. My son actually invested in a waste to power thing that was a waste to power situation. I can't think of it. Company down near San Diego. The very best thing you could put in was plastic. You had to wait. It was like garbage, and I went down there and saw how it worked. Very best thing, and what came out was power for your car. Electricity came out. Gasoline. What do you call it? That gasoline. Biofuel came out, and all the stuff that was left. It was like this charcoal. There was water though, and they had a water purifier for all the water. Then the charcoal could all go into asphalt. It worked perfectly in asphalt. They tried and tried and tried. I tried here in Oakland. They told me I was an idiot because all of that's going to be solved by 2015. They said, and then that was what 15 years ago, whenever it was. They just laughed at me when I
4 years ago.
brought that up,
Okay.
But that was the city council.
Okay. So
The people didn't, the people liked it, but the thing is that there is, that is there, and now they have one in the Navajo reservation. I don't even think they hooked it up, I think they just put it there. People won't do it. They don't want to do it. And they want to say, plastic will be here forever, and there's a big island of plastic out there. Use it for... Anyway. That
Thank
stuff
you.
really pisses
I
me
can
off.
comment on both your comments. Great comments. I think it's pretty established that at this point it's settled science that human emissions of carbon dioxide are related to global warming.
What?
Are related to global warming.
Okay. Nothing else?
That is the primary factor in the last 150
No,
years.
I don't
You should
think
study about it. And
Want money, look at the dollar,
sure,
always.
sure. But your other point is also an interesting one. There is a lot of research that is being done by today to convert waste plastic back into biofuels. And biofuels, which means biofuels, which means basically convert waste plastic back into gasoline and jet fuel. And there is
Into what?
jet fuel, the fuel that drives planes.
But it's biofuel.
It's not exactly a biofuel. My apologies. I take it back. Into biofuel is fuel that is created by organic matter. While plastic comes from oil. So there is a lot of research on that, and we are going to see increasing investment in converting plastic into fuels. So that's happening, and
How do they do that? I mean, what I understand about plastic is that it is not bio. You can't separate the particles of plastic into these separate elements so that, for example, a tree could eat it. A tree could never eat plastic no matter how small the pieces.
when you heat plastic, it melts and it degrades. So it's based on.
So are you saying, but it stays plastic?
No, you can burn plastic. It doesn't stay plastic, right?
It is carbon and hydrogen element.
Get oil. I don't know.
So what you do is you basically do what's called a high temperature pyrolysis, or you heat plastic at high temperatures to break down plastic, and then convert those products back into fuel.
What is the composition of plastic? What are the elements? Carbon, nitrogen, and all, hydrogen?
Plastics based on long carbon polymers which are cross-linked, and those cross-links make very strong bonds. So you have long carbon polymers cross-linked to make plastic, and when you heat, you can break those bonds.
Okay. So,
Okay.
okay, how about you, Nina?
I'll let,
Oh, you have further questions?
I have further questions.
Okay, just hold off.
Hold on, let's see if we
Let's
can-
go to
yeah.
Nina, then we'll come back to you.
That these things are,
There's enough time.
That social problems that we have here, I'm gonna make it very specific here, in Oakland. Like, even if you said mass transportation for Oakland, instead of having everybody have their cars, right? The first thing somebody like me would think of, since I live in the top part of the Fruitvale, et cetera, is that I don't want to be on mass transportation due to the crime rate. Oakland leads the nation in crime, all right? And that this is partially a social problem of, part of the crime problem is that people are not in high school learning any trade that they could make a living off of, all right? And then, such as being an electrician, a computer programmer, fixing computers, anything that after high school, they used to have, like, you'd have a track where you could earn a living. They don't have that. That's just one part of the problem. The other part of the problem has to do with socio-ethno problems, okay? And those haven't been addressed. So I don't want to take mass transit, and I don't think a lot of Oaklanders do. I mean Oaklanders, not Berkeley people who come here periodically, with a bunch of people from Oakland. Frankly, I don't want to be at night waiting at the BART, okay, or etc. And that has to do with guns that have been put to my head on both sides of my head.
Have you experienced that?
Oh, sure. Everybody in Oakland is. Almost everybody I know has. Just right across from my house, two guys who got into my car, and one had one gun here and one there. And it's particularly bad at night. And so this is so as I used to work in vocational rehabilitation for injured workers, retraining workers and stuff. And part of it, just part of it, is that there's no real vocation now that's taught in Oakland high schools, and they're just all testing people to see if they can unrealistically go to college maybe, or compete with another high school about testing, and then they're thrown out with a degree. I mean, that's only part of it. Part of it's a lack of ethics, and a part of socioeconomic, cultural thing about crime, which I understand very well. So so you have to take these factors into consideration when you're talking about me and other people being thrown onto mass transit, particularly at night. So that's it.
Okay, I wanted to, before you respond to that, there are two people whose email I don't have, and if you want me to send you the link to all the programs that get put on YouTube, please fill it out.
Mine?
Yeah, I lost it, so if you don't mind.
It's a long one, I can understand.
Yeah. Well, it lost it means it in the computer was lost. So somehow.
Who's
So
the other person?
Marilyn.
Okay.
Oh,
Marilyn is the next one. Yeah.
okay.
Please go ahead.
I just want to say, people here, around here, in this area, have so much money. So much money. It's unbelievable how much money they have. It's
Really?
terrible. It's terrible. And people don't want to give up this wonderful lifestyle that they have.
Really? I mean, if I talk to my neighbors, most of them are in debt.
1%,
Okay, hold on,
she's
hold
talking
on.
about 1% when she's
Let,
talking
let's,
about the
it's
people around
Marilyn's
here.
turn,
I think
please.
it's only 1%.
Let
I see
Marilyn.
a lot more.
Okay.
And they don't want to give up their comfort and their money and their money-making jobs,
Pass it to Marilyn.
you know? But I'll tell you, unless they do, they're gonna have a lot of comfort in the grave.
Okay.
You know, look at these cars. I mean, I go to Safeway or some supermarket. All these goddamn big cars. I can't even get my car in there, you know?
Those ones are cheaper than the smaller cars, that's why they're doing that.
That's true.
Okay.
Those huge cars, they're cheaper than the smaller cars.
Okay, let,
To buy, or rent.
Not to make.
okay,
But-
let's not have a conversation among ourselves. We have a speaker. Yeah, we have a speaker, let him address, we'll come back to you. Okay, everybody will get a chance, second round. Okay,
You know, I completely sympathize with the dilemma you face. Just last week, I was talking to a friend of mine who takes BART regularly and who says he feels very unsafe in BART now. And you know, I have not experienced that. I mean, but I rarely use BART. You know, so but he says he feels very unsafe traveling BART now, and you know, he just doesn't know what can happen in BART.
Right, and if you're female, you might feel a little less of it.
Sure.
What's his physiognomy? What does he look like?
Okay, he's a handsome white American man.
Wow, man.
Okay, but he's also very sensitive, and you know, he wouldn't be a friend of mine otherwise. So I want to just point at a deeper issue here, which is the way America has become suburban. Suburban. So how you know
What do you mean?
which means that how suburbs have grown,
Nobody
how
else
middle
is-
classes have moved to the suburbs, and how cities have now sort of stopped really developing in terms of, you know, and with blacks and minorities getting ghettoized in cities, and how the middle classes have moved out into the suburbs.
Consider Modesto being a desirable place to live, which it is according to the real estate.
You know, and so it is there are much larger factors that drive, you know, but why is it that there is so much crime in urban centers? Is partly related to the fact that middle classes have just moved out, you know, and you know, and so there are many other sociological factors at play here.
But there's the factor I just mentioned too, that people are not trained.
And then there is no technical
Right away.
training, you know, I mean, no child left behind policies in school have just created a assessment based education. It's not based on skills and training and cooperation, you know. I mean, there are many factors here that need to be considered. But I think mass transportation and development of ecologically balanced transportation is a global thing. It's not just, you know,
We don't understand mass transportation. Mass transportation means all the time. Small vehicles that are relevant, go in the right places. It's a whole different concept. People
Sure.
don't get it.
sure.
okay, so second round, Gene, you have further comments?
Oh, yeah, well, thank you, yeah, and I appreciate this.
I'm coming to you, you keep
Hey,
putting
yeah,
a little
no,
bit,
Gene's
so.
about-
I
Gene.
appreciate this discussion, and part of me wants to say, don't blame me, I voted for Barry Colliner, so, you know, we wouldn't be in this mess. But I want to say the other thing is really important. We talked about war, and I think that's crucial also, but we also have to look at the ecological cost of the ruling class itself, the top 1%, who consume resources at a huge rate. So it's not, you know, if they just drop down to a middle class level, say a lousy $200,000 or $300,000 a year, that would just, you know, transform things. And there's a whole series of things. We really need to look not just at the middle class, but the ruling class, And also remind, like Sandeep, I consider myself a scientific socialist, and recall that, according to scientific socialism, there were two major revolutions, the Russian Revolution and the Chinese Revolution, which transformed things, and that didn't come easy. It was massive dislocations. So I just wanted to say that.
So can we give two people at a time, then you
Sure,
answer?
sure.
So Gigi, you go for next. Then we'll-
Well, one thing is, I take BART all the time. I take local buses all the time. I stand with people, all these black people. No one
Sorry,
has
man.
ever bothered me, ever.
That's your
And I'm an old lady. They could take my purse.
That's
No
your
one's ever tried to.
individual
I'm just telling you my truth.
Yeah.
And I also take the trains going to Sacramento. I go back and forth in train. I have my own car, but I find that I like public transportation. I think it's really good. One thing I want to say. And the other thing is, the reason I mentioned war is that's where all the oil is used. Why are people going to talk about the little cars? The oil is used in war. I've been seeing it on TV, the percentage of oil. And all the more tanks, more tanks, guns, all the stuff, that's all oil. And plus killing, not to mention murdering people all over the world, that would be part of it too. So
Well,
anyway.
Why we just go,
I'm just saying.
looks like everybody's hyped up, so everybody.
No, I
does
can
it.
comment on these two first.
Okay.
Otherwise, I lose track of things. if you-
Okay, so
Sure.
Sandeep comments on these two, then we'll go to Norma.
Ridiculous.
I think so. I'll start with Jean's comment and just a quick comment. And so I think it's really important to consider the consumption patterns of 1%, because the global ecological footprint is an important consideration. But more importantly, they create values for the rest of the society. Everybody wants to be like them, which is terrible. I mean, these guys just live completely debauched, terrible lives, and everybody wants to become like them.
Debauched.
Yeah, and so I think both from an ideological perspective and the footprint, ecological footprint, it just, the lives of 1% are just terrible and they need to be criticized in every respect, so no questions about it.
Some of them even commit suicide because of that, abstain.
Yeah, I mean, and they live
Uh,
unstable lives, I mean, look at Hollywood characters, I mean.
Oh, okay.
So I want to comment on war and oil, and I think this is a very, very important point. Because global wars have been driven by oil in Middle East, and Middle East is the arena of wars in the last, 2 or 3 decades or 4 decades. And it's really important to now consider that the position of US, which has been the driving force behind these wars. US was in the last 3 decades, let's say till 2010, till Iraq and Afghanistan and even the Syrian war, the primary purpose of US was to control these oil resources because it was dependent on them. And that was really the genesis of all the Middle Eastern wars. But we have to now understand that the position of US has changed completely in the last 10 years. And this is the point I didn't make in the presentation. I mean, if you look at US after the recession of 2008, there is an old US that is based on finance capital and the military industrial complex. There is a new US that has emerged in the last 10 years. The recovery of US from the great financial crisis is based on 2 sectors, both driven by technology. One is the tech sector, and we live in Silicon Valley, so we know what's happening in the tech sector. And the other one is shale. Shale.
For fracking.
Shale, fracking.
Oh, shale.
Yeah, shale, oil and gas.
Sometimes we don't know what you're saying because I can't.
I'm sorry, I
I know, it's
can't do it with my Indian accent.
I know. It sounded like shell oil. That's-
Shell, no, not shell. Okay, fracking. So these 2 sectors have
Still military industrial complex.
These 2 sectors have sustained US recovery in the last 10 years, and there's been a massive growth of both these sectors. These 2 sectors sit above the military industrial complex. And what US is doing now is, instead of trying to control all the oil resources in the world, its new function is to eliminate oil sources so that it can become the oil supplier of choice to the world. And so wars are continuing and military consumes a lot of oil, but there has been a subtle shift in the last 10 years. US is the largest producer of oil and gas in the world today, more than Russia and Saudi Arabia. And so the entire, political purpose of imperialist war has undergone a subtle shift. Take out Iran and its capacity. Take out Venezuela and its capacity.
Right.
So there is a shift that has happened. But wars are central to, you're right, oil and wars are central to how, world has evolved in the last 2 or 3 decades.
Okay, before we go to Norma, may I make a comment?
Sure.
And my comment is on this point. It'll be very brief comment, which is I think war is endemic to capitalism. It is not because of oil. It is capitalism that's the source of wars. So as long as there's capitalism remains, wars will continue. And because if you look in the history, no socialist country ever embarked on a war on its own. It went on a defensive. So wars, it doesn't matter. If the oil is not there, wars would be on solar power. It's capitalism. Okay, so Norma, you get your full 2 minutes.
I want more.
No. See,
Shut up!
We have 3 minutes remaining, so
Shut up, Nina!
This is like 1%.
Shut up,
Much
Nina.
more than her 2
Shut up,
minutes.
Nina!
Please don't talk like that.
Would you
It's
please?
very disturbing to me.
Norma, yeah, you're out of order on saying shut up. Okay, this is not polite.
We have a president that wanted to explode hurricanes. We have a system that depends on what's called innovation, and this was a proposal made, how preposterous it was to deal with it. On the other hand, I would like us to look at organic food production and see it as a way to go, that what's going on now, of course, even the large farming, the gathering and so forth, the monoculturing for one thing, the whole aspect of food production, the way it is predominantly done, even though it's done only by 3% of the population, the people who are stretching out into organics are proving a point, and we can subsidize that and encourage it so that we can grow a cow, for example, as well as lettuce. There was another, we don't all want to be like the 1%. We all want the security and comfort that is presumed that the 1% have. One of the things I talk about is we're not afraid of dying. We're afraid of getting to death because we don't have enough care to be able to tolerate it physically, mentally. Our own discomforts are not ameliorated in the process. The best choice being the choice to die from something that's killing us regardless, like needing kidney dialysis, for example. China finds our production of pollution extremely serious. So it's not as though we are able to ignore it. It's an event for the whole world. I think that's all there is here.
Thank you.
Carbon
So
tax
we're
and
just going to go
capitalism.
quick comments. Please keep it to.
What? I'm talking and you're talking?
Well, I thought you finished.
You said you finished.
No, she's not finished.
I said, Anita can't understand English. No, she's having a
Well,
lot
but-
of trouble.
You don't have to leave.
I said, I think that's all. And I said, let me look.
Well, we've got 2
No,
minutes,
no,
and
no.
I think they're up.
Your time is up, Norma. Please.
That's it.
Your time is up. Nina, please go.
I don't have
I
anything
don't have
else
anything to say except I would just like to say, it is not acceptable to yell at Nina, shut up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I agree.
it's
I agree.
necessary.
That was. I said you're
No,
out
it's
of
not.
order.
It's necessary.
No, it's not.
No,
You
it's
don't know
impolite.
that?
It's
totally
impolite, rude.
unacceptable, and perhaps you should leave this group.
Rude.
Do you know all that? That's for the children, it's for the adults too.
Yeah.
Marilyn,
This list here.
Marilyn, you're next.
Come
Your
on.
comment is the
Don't
last
leave.
one.
I'm just too disturbed by the squabbling. I
Yeah.
can't take it anymore.
Do you want your, Marilyn, if you want to sign up, your email address, I can
Yes, I do.
send you the YouTube links that I produce. And please write it down there. Okay, thank you, Sandeep, unless you have final thoughts. if you want to give. Otherwise, we end. So your final
No,
thoughts.
no, that's fine. Let's just end.
Okay, one thing I want to say, Sandeep is coming back with his political analysis. That's why he didn't cover. Today's was a technical session. So he will come back for that, where he will, his last slide, his slide was showing the 3 points of view on climate change, and his last one was socialism. And I think before we get to 2%, there will be a global socialist revolution, overthrow the whole system, in my opinion.
All right.
It would have to be, and it will happen.
I think what you're saying, it would have to be because of the way.
It have to be, and that's when it happens, when it has to be.
Scrapbook.
That's how it is.
Perhaps, yeah, but I do think it'd be great if you try to integrate some of the questions we had in your next, like address some of the socio-economic problems of having mass friends or whatever, you know.
And we hope it's less than 6 months because we only have 12 years left. So
Yeah, we have like, you know, just a little time left.
Sandeep speed it up.
That's dark humor. You know, I have one question.
Sure.